I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that excellent overview of what's happening at Metropolitan. And I'm Pamela Bursler. I am going to be your presenter today. And I wanted just to, I don't have a slide today, but I wanted just to encourage everybody to go ahead and open up that icon for Q&A because it's kind of a community back there. There's a lot you can ask questions, you can add on to questions. So click on that there. Marianne Simon from G3 and folks from MWD and SoCal Gas are back there. They can answer your questions. There she is. We encourage you to do that, and we will try to have time at the end to also do some of the top, top five or whatever. All right. Today's workshop is called Trees Growing in Urban Forest, and you may have taken this workshop previously. I am happy to announce that it has been updated, but they're still watching. They truly are. I'm serious. They're watching us. And trees have long been guardians in history. These days, maybe we need one of those Ents or a leshy, which is depicted here, to inspire our protection of the trees, the forests, the lands. Today's workshop is broken into these 6 categories. We're going puzzle pieces, of course, where it all fits together. We're going to start by talking about trees and their benefits, a little bit about what we call horticulture, trees, roots, and soil, really talking about how we keep them healthy, some tips to protect trees, what do we do about proper watering, and then how do we encourage planting more trees? Of course, the tree bait is a great way for Southern Californians to be planting more trees, and what are some of the considerations there? So let's start with trees and their benefits. In the wild, I think the most important thing to remember about trees is they are not ornaments. They're not objects. They're living organisms, and they are the hosts for a myriad of other living things. They don't call them grandfather and grandmother trees for nothing. In fact, oak woodlands support more than 5,000 species of insects and arachnids, not even talking about all the mammals and other creatures that are dependent on it, and even trees that are dependent on oaks. And in fact, many trees are actually keystone species. In other words, they perform a function that is critical to the entire ecosystem. If that particular species, the tree, becomes degraded or diminished within the ecosystem, entire species that are dependent would become extinct. And keystone species are becoming more and more rare. It's really critical that we start to think of trees as not just something we add on to a landscape design or that are afterthoughts in our maintenance of landscapes, but are actually our priority. And they benefit the earth in multiple ways. Of course, they provide shade, and they're actually the lungs of the earth. I mean, the thing that's so interesting about all plants is that they are cycling carbon and oxygen and water, and they do this so efficiently. Using that solar radiation of the sun, they are able to take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, split off the oxygen, return it back to the atmosphere, and then utilize all that carbon in really beautiful ways to completely transform the earth. And this process really of exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen and water vapor, of course, through evapotranspiration, where they're returning water vapor to the atmosphere. I mean, this is essential. We would not have Earth if we didn't have this function, and so it's really important for us to protect. It's like protecting our lungs. Of course, they provide food, wetlands protection, really important in certain environments for controlling flooding and soil erosion. And of course, they're providing habitat of all kinds. We talked about arachnids and insects, and of course, the birds that feed on them and reptiles and amphibians. Actually, the oak itself will support more than 500 different species of moth and butterfly caterpillars. And this is super important because birds at different times of the year are absolutely dependent on the soft-bodied insects. It's not, uh, they need that to feed their young. They need the protein that's in that, in those caterpillars. And if we don't have host plants for the caterpillars, this population of birds is going to plummet. So we really need to make sure that we are, that we're supporting oak trees in particular, are important. And there are oaks throughout the world, really. But we want to think about, what is the impact of even just one tree? It's pretty impressive. Of course, birds of prey take refuge there, control mammals like this guy who's always stealing the stuff out of the bird feeder. And their roots act as cisterns. I think this is something we don't often think about. We think about what's above ground, but below ground, we have these massive structures that are completely re-engineering the soil. They're holding on to thousands and thousands of gallons of water. Um, uh, the tree diameter and depth, it can be up to millions of gallons of water in a small copse of trees. And in urban settings, they're absolutely critical to have a healthy city. They conserve energy. Think about deciduous trees, and I'm going to show you actually the placement of trees and how we can use them to conserve energy, but they provide that shade in the summer and they allow winter sun to come in. So this is an important function. They reduce stormwater runoff by slowing, spreading, and sinking water from the canopy to the root zone. And this tree is particularly advantageously placed right there with the curb cut. It's really a beautiful example of stormwater management. Have you ever seen this tree this big? Oh, by the way, it's really very impressive. I think it enjoys getting the runoff. There's psychological benefits from trees. Reduced stress just being in this kind of environment. In fact, the background that I have, when I put it up, I felt myself, relax right there. So even virtually, trees provide this stress reduction. And that's because your mind is actually hardwired to be rejuvenated by observing fractals and complex structures. The whole evolution of humans with nature has made our brains particularly um, needy, really, when it comes to a natural setting. We need to have this stimulation, this very deep stimulation of the kind of complex patterns that tree canopies and forests provide to us. And of course, there's forest bathing, which is an ancient practice where you spend time in the forest and completely unplug from all the devices and everything, and you allow your all five senses and maybe even six to really connect into this environment. I want to mention that this particular image is actually from a workshop that we do with Arlene Ferrara, who's a horticultural therapist, and she talks about humans and nature and how important it is for us to be connected to a natural setting. Taking a walk among trees is really important because, again, those fractal patterns uh, are actually defragging our brain. I mean, this is a really interesting thing. If you think about it, our brains as though they are, sort of computing devices. This observance of these patterns actually defrags it, opens up space. And the aromatic chemicals that come from the trees as they are evapotranspiring is really just an incredibly important part of that connection to nature, which is rejuvenating in mind and body and spirit. And even in urban settings, when you are able to be out amongst trees and look into the canopies, it provides the same uh, the same benefits, and it's not in any way diminished just because you're in an urban setting. And in fact, I will share with you that I had to take a sabbatical in 2021, and every day I opened up my window and I looked out at this beautiful grandfather tree, I call it, and I credit it with really saving my life. So trees are pretty important beings. Okay, well, let's talk about horticulture because this is basically what we're doing to them. Cities without trees become deserts very, very, very quickly. And they become social deserts. So one of the things about this connection to nature and all those benefits that I just talked about with trees in an urban environment is that uh, they actually allow people to be out in that urban environment. They provide that shade. They provide a cooling atmosphere. All that water vapor that they're putting into the atmosphere is actually like a misting system. It's cooling things down. And when cities are cooler, people are more social. And so as we remove trees, as we cut trees, in order to open up views of signage and other things in urban environments, we are actually decreasing foot traffic. We're keeping people from wanting to be on the street or in that community. So it's really something that we can control. We need to plant a lot more trees right in the urban core in order to bring people back into that urban core, if that's what we want, and especially with more dense um, uh, housing and more density that is happening, a mixed use development that's happening in urban and suburban areas. This is super important that this becomes part of infrastructure. This green infrastructure is critical. And we just can't reap the benefits of those trees, though, if they're not healthy, if they're not managed properly, and we're not really, caring for them and thinking about them, not so much from a human-centric point of view, but from a tree-centric point of view, an ant-centric point of view, and maybe even from an animal point of view. It requires that we shift our thinking. Trees are in urban environments are pruned annually, primarily to avoid leaf drop. I mean, think about how absolutely ridiculous that is, and what we are doing to those plants, and it's really quite incredible. And as a result, they're dying, and it's because they're stressed, and drought, it stresses them even more. So we get the stress of how they're managed, we get the drought stress, and then disease sets in, and we're on a downhill slope. We see trees planted in bare soil all the time. This is absolutely, one of the most typical things you're going to see. Or planted in gravel. No doubt a weed barrier as well under the gravel to keep it from mixing with the soil. If you're going to be using gravel in a landscape, please limit it to paths and seating areas and some kind of permeable hardscape. It's not a planting medium. It makes things hotter. There's no food for microbial activity when these leaves, fruit, and flowers drop onto the ground. They can't decompose easily and go back into the soil to feed the tree. It's also super tough to manage what's happening here when you do have leaf litter. You have, in order to even rake it up or put it into compost, it's nearly impossible to do when you have a situation like this. So just don't use gravel, okay? It doesn't make sense. They're planted in decomposed granite. We have the same issues in decomposed granite. Very, very difficult for them to actually be watered correctly. They're in this environment that's getting hot. It's compacted, and we don't have any biological activity going on. And we could spread mulch right around the tree, and that would certainly help things. But trees have a much wider spread than just their little planting hole. And this tree is basically planted in a container, and people wonder, what's wrong with the tree? Maybe it needs more water. I mean, it doesn't need more water. It needs less water and it needs a better environment. We mulch them and then we put down this giant mulch, right up against the trunk. First of all, that this stuff is just holding moisture against this trunk. So just from that perspective, this is a terrible practice. But also these giant bark pieces are super difficult to digest by the soil microbial community. That's the whole purpose of mulch. So this is definitely not doing this tree any benefit. If this tree were losing debris of this size, we would be really concerned, right? So we want to be thinking about having mulch that mimics what's coming from the tree. So leaves, small twigs, flowers, that kind of stuff. Yeah, not this. And ivy. Ivy is allowed to just grow up into trees. It's not managed. People think it's pretty. It's green, so it must be great. And actually, beside being a vector for rodents, it also is a terrible thing for the health of this tree. It essentially smothers it to death. So no. And rocks, same thing. Not really. I mean, this is maybe the worst of them all. Um, when we put rocks on top of trees, and I've gone to very high-end um, hotels and spas, and looked at how trees are managed, and you invariably see these rocks all around the trees, and I just can't understand it. It's like what we're doing, we're compacting the soil around the trees. It is not providing the decomposition that is necessary for the tree. And oh, by the way, having even something that's holding moisture against the roots in this way is completely detrimental for these trees. These rocks should be removed. And if anything, leaving some of the tree, this is an oak, some of the tree's own leaf litter on the ground, would be fine. But really, this is doing absolutely nothing good for the tree. And in fact, it's bad for it. And then, of course, we have the sort of opposite effect, which is the good news is there's no rocks here, but this is definitely way overwatered. There's no mulch. The soils are completely depleted, and obviously there's compaction because having a root system like this, it's being way overwatered, which means there's no oxygen in the soil. Plus, the roots have nowhere to go, and this is just a recipe for disaster. Uh, Same thing. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but why we think that a tree can thrive in a condition like this is just beyond me. Nothing about this is good. Imagine if you had to live in solitary confinement for the rest of your life. You wouldn't do very well either. And when we do overwater, in this case, you can see the water it's a spray irrigation system. It's watering the trunk. This is, you know, an awful situation for the tree. It suffers every time it gets hit like that with the water. And then there's this grass on top of it. It's not a surprise that the roots are all the way up at the surface. And really what's happening here is this is a very weak situation. This tree is suffering and is going to be inclined to disease. The roots want the water, not the trunks. Okay. So if you are going to have spray irrigation systems, please adjust them so that they're not hitting the trees. I mean, this tree just didn't even stand a chance. You can see here that it looks like it's been burned. This hasn't been burned. This has been hit by water. So, it's the same kind of thing where the bark is degraded, and we're seeing the interior of the tree, and we can see that it's just really bad. And on top of it, it's growing in decomposed granite. I mean, oh, I feel sad when I drive by, and you can tell that this picture was taken at about 10 miles an hour, which is why you should never drive behind me. But you can see this is something that it's really sad, and you see this everywhere. It's not just it's not just one part of California. It's really across the country. And when you do have drip irrigation, it should be appropriately at the base of the tree, out at the drip line for a very, very mature tree like this, which I know is a challenge when it's placed in a parkway, as this is. Trees get improperly staked. They maybe get staked the first, when they're planted, or they come on the nursery stakes and then they're not cross staked. Um, they're not taken off those nursery stakes, or there's some kind of, I don't even know what to call that thing on the right. Um, Somebody thought it was a good idea. Uh, yeah. And the thing about this is that when trees are young, they need to be able to have motion. If they don't have motion, their root system will not learn essentially that the tree might have stress on it, might have wind stress, it might have, it's going to have this motion in it. And so the tree never learns how to keep itself upright, which is really, sad. Um, we plant trees and then we create these craters around them, as we have here, and we just have water ponding right at the trunk. I think it's possible that this tree was also girdled, with meaning the roots were too tight in the can and they went around and around instead of down. But nonetheless, this is not going to be a good thing for the irrigation, because, or for the water efficiency really of this tree, because that water is ponding against its trunk. Doesn't make sense. We butcher them. This is a 70 by 70 tree, 70-foot tall, 70-foot wide. Yeah, it doesn't want this. And you see it every day. I mean, this is actually happening every day in every neighborhood everywhere. And they're very resilient. They have lots of strategies for taking care of themselves. You'll find them in very surprising places, quite adaptable. They're able to really thrive on poor conditions. Um, you know that this is just a little acorn that got lodged in between these giant boulders, and over time, just enough water got in there for that acorn to get going, and there it is. And you can see that, all these strategies, this tree was probably browsed when it was young, and or maybe it even burned and it came up as a basal growth, and then there was never any kind of pruning, that happened to that basal growth, and so we got something like this. And even when they are stumps, and damaged, there's still life in them, and they're still become an important part of the ecosystem. So they're returning nutrients to the soil. They continue to be habitat for creatures, but they need our help. I mean, we can't continue treating them in that way. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to understand that trees are an integral part of the watershed. And as all of the training that we talk about, it all comes back to thinking about our properties as though it's a mini watershed. And this is essentially viewing our property as, figuring out, where does water fall in it, where does the water leave that property, and how do we cycle uh, water, carbon, oxygen, uh, everything right on the property as efficiently as possible. And the way that we do that is by applying the 4 principles of the watershed approach. Now, the 4 principles are growing healthy living soil to create a sponge. We know this is super important because it holds on to water when it's dry, and it releases water slowly when it's wet. We want to select climate appropriate plants. And that's really what the tree thing is about. Although I will argue that trees are absolutely integral to the growing of healthy living soil as well. And the next principle, which is capturing rainwater passively, in other words, holding it in the soil for the benefit of the plants, using it as a resource, as a free resource. Trees are also integral in that. Wow, we can't really separate it out, right? And then finally, the fourth principle, the watershed approach, is using highly efficient supplemental irrigation only when necessary. That means the system is designed, installed, and maintained properly. And only when necessary means that we're irrigating because the plants need it, when they need it, not just because it's a Tuesday. So these are the four principles, and trees, really fit into all four of these principles. I mentioned before that trees control their environment, but I really want to dig into that just a little bit more so that you have a clear grasp of what I mean by that. Um, the trees, and actually all plants, are utilizing solar radiation. That's their energy source. And their leaves are the solar panels that gather that solar radiation. They are using it in order to extract CO2, carbon dioxide, out of the atmosphere and convert, through a process called photosynthesis, convert that CO2 into these beautiful chains, carbon chains. And there are all kinds of carbon chains that the plant is making. It does release oxygen back out into the atmosphere, of course, and then it takes the carbon and it begins to transform it. Some of it gets turned into material that it can use as a building block for its own body. It's a structure and leaves and fruit and flowers and so forth. But a lot of this carbon is actually transformed into carbohydrates for soil organisms. And so it's pushed down through the plant into the root system. And when it goes into the root system, these carbon compounds are fed to the microbial community. And the microbial community is just like, any community. It needs to build housing. It needs to have transportation. It needs water. It needs oxygen. It needs to have places to raise its young. I mean, I'm serious. And most of the microbial community is a mining community. In other words, they're kind of number one trade in the soil is mining minerals out of the soil. And this is a good thing because the trees and plants have actually paired with the microbial community to utilize the minerals that have been mined out of the soil, and they exchange these carbohydrates that the trees created. They exchange it for the minerals that the microbes have mined. And so this is the beautiful interaction between plants and soil that that enables those soil microbes and the roots of the plants to literally change. I call it engineering, re-engineer green infrastructure, the soil itself in order to support the tree. So this is an incredible thing. And then the final part of this is not really the final, but the other part I want to talk about is when the plant is in need of cooling down its solar panels. So remember, this is hot work, gathering sun. When it cools down its solar panels, it is actually extracting water from the soil and pulling it up through through its structure into the canopy and releasing it through the leaves of the plant as atmospheric water. And when it does that, it actually embeds soil microbes into those minuscule water droplets. And why do we care about that? Well, it's important because those soil microbes actually condense water at a lower atmospheric level than any other particulate. So, there's all kinds of dust and pollution and pollen and other particulates, anyway, things that are in the atmosphere that can condense water. But that all happens at a much higher altitude. the microbes can condense at a lower altitude. And as a result, when you have trees and lots of plants in an environment, you are actually creating the conditions for gentle rain over that land area. If we replant, lots and lots of trees and lots of plants, we could actually alter, it's called the small water cycle. We could actually alter this water cycle to be bringing more gentle rain to right back to our own environment. So this beautiful re-engineering that trees do. And there's a major soil party going on in the soil for sure. All those microbes mining nutrients for the plant, and that biology actually covers the entire plant, and it's building like a defense system that helps the plant protect it from predators. In some of our classes we talk about something called a Brix analysis, which is essentially an analysis of the total dissolved solids in the leaf matter of the plant. And when the Brix level goes up, and the only way Brix increases is when soil health is, increasing. When the Brix increases at certain levels, sucking insects and other kinds of predatory insects are uh, are repelled from the plant itself. I mean, it's kind of amazing. Defense system for a plant starts in the soil. And trees and fungi actually have a symbiotic relationship that is really credited with completely changing Earth and allowing the rise of mammals in the on Earth. And this symbiotic relationship is found, it's based on this exchange of carbohydrates that I talked about before, where the fungi is able to actually grow into the roots of the plants and get the carbohydrates from the tree. And then the fungi goes out and it connects all over the place, and it actually manages microbes. It gets minerals from other parts of the soil. It can decompose organic matter itself to create minerals for the plant. And the thing is that fungi cannot, because they don't have leaves, they can't photosynthesize. So they don't have energy on their own. They need to have the tree gathering that energy from the sun and giving it to them through these carbohydrate strains. So this is super important, and we really wouldn't have any nutrient cycling at all in the soil. We wouldn't have any water holding in the soil if it weren't for the fungi. And I just want to mention one of my favorite things to think about with fungi, and this is super important for trees, actually all plants, is that when they're paired up with fungi, that fungi is kind of a superhero. It has strength that way exceeds any root of any plant. And it can do two things that are, kind of miraculous. The first thing is that even in soils that are desiccated to, our eye, completely dry soils, there are still microfilms of water. And the fungi can actually access those microfilms. It cannot be accessed by roots at all. So by pairing with fungi, trees are able to access water even in really, really dry times, which is why a tree in healthy living soil is going to be better prepared to survive a drought than a tree that has not been allowed to grow in healthy living soil. The other thing is that fungi is able to push through even incredibly compacted soils. The strength of fungi is basically like if you took your finger and pushed it through concrete. So this is a really important relationship for trees. And in fact, I think you need to start thinking about trees and fungi as one entity. But not just any fungi will do. It's actually, there are two key kinds of fungi. the ectomycorrhizal and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. I'll talk first about ectomycorrhizal fungi. These are kind of working on top of roots. So they can be extensions of roots, but they're not actually penetrating within the plant and exchanging within the plant. But they do have associations with woody plants, all woody plants, not just trees. Arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi is actually able to go into the root cells of vascular plants. This is a relationship that is more than 400 million years old. I mean, this is really, this is the ultimate buddy system. It's a completely dependent and reliable relationship. I mean, actually, you can see some really amazing video of fungi penetrating the roots of plants. And now here's something that I think is really begins to change our understanding of how trees work. Um, Trees are work in a community, and it's this network of fungi that actually connects them and keeps them communicating with each other. When I first saw uh, um, I'm blanking now. All of a sudden I can think of the director, but I can't think of the name of the thing. Anyway, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about in just a second. But anytime I see anything depicted about trees communicating with each other or communicating with animals or humans or humanoids, um, in the case of fantasy, I understand this is the fungi that is doing that connection. And in a setting like a forest, there are actually trees that are mother trees. They are trees that are managing a relationship with other plants in the forest. Um, it will, Mother trees are able through the mycorrhizal network to send nutrients to particular seedlings in order to encourage growth. If plants are in too much shade, they will send more carbohydrate to those plants so that they have the energy to start to grow up and maybe even compete for resources. Um, and they also connect into um, the rest of the trees in the forest and are able to share resources through the network. So, for example, when there are deciduous trees in a community and there are evergreen trees in a community, the deciduous trees lose their leaves, of course, in the wintertime. But if they lose their leaves, how do they do photosynthesis? Well, they don't have the energy or capacity to have energy in order to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So they need to rely on the evergreen trees. The evergreen trees continue to photosynthesize and they send the carbohydrates to the deciduous trees through the network. In the spring, when the deciduous trees put their leaves back on, they send the carbon back to the evergreen trees. They thank them and send carbon back. I mean, like, what? um, so this is a really important thing. If there's a mother tree may get cues that it's under attack, it has some kind of insect or pathogen pressure, it may actually send out signals and enzymes in through the mycorrhizal network to kill off its seedlings that are within a particular radius of it and simultaneously send nutrient to seedlings that are further away, thereby protecting its progeny that is further away. So it's an intelligent network. It's an ancient network, and it's pretty incredible. When you are driving through the hills, the oak savannas and whatever is residual grasslands of California, take a look at this phenomenon called tree shadows. You will see them. The tree shadows are existing not because of the sun. I mean, there's a little bit of the fact that these areas are in the shade of the canopy of the tree, but mostly what's going on with the tree shadow, where you see this more dense, more green growth around the tree, what's happening here is the plants that are in this area are actually receiving more carbohydrates from this tree. They are in communication with this tree. This is a community. And tree shadows are an incredibly important thing when we start to think, oh, well, there used to be many, many more oak trees, right? So that's why, these grasslands used to be a lot healthier, have a lot more diversity and so forth. And in part, it's because there were trees in the grassland. So it's something for us to think about. This symbiotic relationship is super important. Um, when you see fish bones in the forest, what's that about? Like, why would there be fish bones, miles and miles away from, from the ocean? And actually, it turns out that these are ocean-faring fish. Like, how is it possible? Well, Suzanne Simard, who is a researcher in Canada, has actually discovered that through the tree fungal association, there's actually a support of other species going on. When salmon come from the ocean and come upriver and to spawn, they are eaten by bears. They're grabbed, they're taken into the forest, they're eaten by bears. And the nutrients that they are bringing from the ocean are actually then dispersed in the forest through the fungal network. I mean, really. I mean, and these are nutrients that are not available in terrestrial situations, right? This is the beautiful cycle of how animals on this planet are are tapped into trees and microbial communities. And it's, this is something that we really need to respect and you know, build on. And even when a tree is dying, it has a role in the community. It will actually begin to transfer the carbon in its system, these carbohydrates essentially, out into through the network and start to feed other creatures in the network as it's dying. About 40% of the carbon from a dying tree is actually transmitted into neighboring trees. And how do we know this? Well, I mentioned Suzanne Simard. Her lab was one of the first to inject trees with um, radioactive isotopes and then track those radioactive isotopes throughout the forest. And so they were able to see exactly where the carbon strand or the carbon that originated, let's say, with the mother tree, where did it end up in the community? And a lot of this data is from that research that's been ongoing for about the last 20 years. Um, Stumperies, which are essentially collections of wood from dying trees or dead trees, are design features. They are coveted in many communities, and they're important habitat. Uh, Hugelkultur, which is the practice, it's also called mound culture or carbon culture. It's the practice of returning wood and plant material back into the soil in a very direct way. So instead of going through composting and so forth, or even mulching, this is actually burying wood right into the soil. Now, there is a way of thinking about soil soil chemistry that says, oh, you can't put so much carbon into soil because it will rob the soil of nitrogen. And it is true that carbon and nitrogen need to bond together. But what those models ignore is the biochemical aspects of what is going on in soil. Yes, there is a nitrogen deficiency, if you will, happening when you do hugelkultur. But what's interesting is the plants that thrive in a hugelkultur have a nitrogen fixing capability. So you will often see hugelkulturs or mounds pioneered with pioneer plants on them and really thriving. And those pioneer plants are the plants that are able to reassert the balance of carbon nitrogen because they can fix nitrogen right out of the atmosphere. So it's very, very interesting to look at the hugelkultur um, phenomenon and all the benefits that this practice is bringing to a landscape, because essentially the buried wood is acting like a nurse log for the plants around it, and it really can just become a giant sponge right in the landscape. So hugelkultur is a pretty important aspect of landscaping, I think, going into the future, and making sure that all of this wood is actually returned to the landscape. As I said, it's essentially as though we have nurse logs now in the landscape, helping other plants, giving off that carbon to the other plants to tap into. And when you bury logs like this into a bioswale, you boost the water holding capacity pretty incredibly. And it's not so much because the logs are absorbing water. That's not really what's going on. It's because you've created a lot of void space. There's a lot of surface area to be colonized by microbial activity. And so it's basically creating housing for microbes when you do this. And in practice, it's a really easy thing to do. So if you are removing trees from a landscape, instead of having it hauled off, think about how it gets reincorporated back into the landscape. Here, trees were removed in a turf replacement project, and they were then used as creating raised beds, creating lining pathways. Essentially recycling that tree and honoring that tree. You know, Keeping it in its place where where it had been for its entire life, and keeping all that carbon on site as well. And please don't look at the tree that's not staked properly in this picture. I promise you it was correctly staked before we left the job. Uh, so I just came across this installation recently, which is a little bit of a mix of stumpery hugelkultur and leaving snags in the ground, leaving that dead material so that it can be used by insects, by mammals, by all the kinds of microbes. This, I was told, was a particularly difficult planting area, and so um, the logs and so forth were used to do some retaining, and then they were used decoratively to encourage insect activity. And so it's really great, and it can be quite decorative. It doesn't have to be something that is just like a big pile of logs, like in that first stumpery picture. It can actually be quite organized and even very decorative. This is a installation. Uh, Longtime artist who actually kept all the uh, Arctocephalus and Manzanita branches and painted them red because they lost their color after after they died. And yeah, so pretty interesting. And it's important to remember, though, that not every mushroom is a good thing. This is what is called honey mushroom, which you might want to eat, but it wants to eat the tree. So honey fungus, Armillaria root rot, is a kind of interesting fungi because, well, first of all, it is going to be right under the bark. And so it's really devouring the tree from the inside. May you may see these these fungal masses under the bark, or you might see the thing on the right, which is more like the shoestring mycelium. So both of these situations are, Armillaria is a mycelial fungi. Now, Pamela, you just said that mycelium was, a really good thing. Well, there are studies that are being done to try to discern when is armillaria, when is it detrimental to a tree or an ecosystem, and when is it at least inert, where it isn't having, it's present, but it's not having any detrimental effect. And what those studies are pointing to is that it's really about compaction, loss of oxygen in the soil, loss of soil structure. Overwatering is what used to be it used to be attributed to. And of course, overwatering causes those conditions of compaction, loss of oxygen in the soil. But essentially, what is being said is that soil is no longer healthy living soil. And so when we set up the conditions to create uh, uh, stressed out soil where that microbial activity is not happening anymore and the plant isn't able to get its defense, from the soil, these are the conditions for armillaria to take hold. And even though it's there in almost all of the soils, it doesn't go bad, it doesn't go rogue until those unhealthy soil conditions appear. And I think this is a really important thing for us to remember. And it all comes back to soil health. If we can keep soil healthy, we don't have to really worry so much about armillaria. It's just like protozoa on our skin. They're there. Some of them might be harmful, but they don't do anything bad unless we become sick, or we become ill from something else, and then they take advantage of that. It's the exact same thing here. You can tell that there's something going on that is likely to be armillaria when you see that oozing coming out of the main stem. And if you do see that oozing, it means that further investigation is needed. I mean, the tree can look perfectly fine up in the canopy, but when you're seeing this, and birch, oak, fruit trees, and ficus hedges are particularly impacted. And I would say I am not surprised, right? Ficus hedges, are they often in healthy soil? Probably not. Fruit trees, many times overwatered. Oak and birch, the same thing. In a landscape scenario, overwatering is actually one of the main culprits here. Okay, so how do we protect the trees? Well, first of all, they love mulch. So let's leaf it in place. Please keep it 3 to 4 inches thick. And if, better than importing mulch is just the leaf litter from the tree. I mean, honestly, keep it there. It wants that leaf litter. It's only accepting the mulch that you're importing because it doesn't have its own leaf litter. And respect the drip line. So what we mean by that is as the tree grows and the canopy expands, you want to make sure that you are not disturbing inside the canopy. So the edges of the canopy are called the drip line. And really everything inside of that is where we have to be cautious as we are planting, as we're directing rainwater to the site, all the things. And certainly with regard to planting other plants. One of the recommendations I've made in the past is plant right outside the drip line and plant ground covers that are spreading. If the conditions are good for that plant to move under the canopy, it will do so, but you haven't disturbed the soil under that canopy. That plant is moving under the canopy sort of at the request of the tree. I mean, they're going to be working together to create a condition that's habitable. So planting outside of the drip line is really important. And really, it's important to remember that even when you're outside the drip line, you're still probably within the root zone of the tree. A healthy tree is going to have a massive root zone, and it is not just a horizontal root zone, it is also a deep root zone. These two go together, especially in healthy soil conditions and in conditions where there are other plants planted. And I'm going to show you some pictures of that in a bit. If you have compaction underneath a existing tree, you can use a hand auger at or beyond the drip line and make some auger some holes. I mean, this is a 3/8 inch drill bit, 18-inch long, just, regular drill bit. And these holes are being poked into the soil at intervals. What interval? It's up to you. But as soon as you make those holes, you're going to fill them with compost or worm castings and then water it in. This is one way that we can start to bring more oxygen, water, and life back to a compacted situation. Trees and rain gardens go together like peanut butter and jelly. So we want to keep them together as much as possible. The trees love the rain, they need the rain, but want to make sure that you're not excavating within the drip line of the tree again. Keep it outside of the drip line and keep it really shallow. You don't want to be digging down, 2 feet deep, swale things here and then filling them up with rock. Keep it shallow, keep it simple. Here's an excellent picture of a relationship between trees, ground covers, plants, and a rain garden. And don't plant in the basin unless you have a riparian tree. So in this particular case, you're going to say, well, what? That looks like it's planted in the basin. No, actually, this tree is planted on a mound. It has got a basin at a wider area just around the drip line of the tree. But inside that drip line, this tree has actually been planted up on a mound. So elevating the roots out of what was going to be a place where rainwater was going to be directed. So we would not want this tree sunken down at the bottom of the rainwater collection area, unless, of course, it was a willow or an alder, some kind of thing that could really take that excess water, maybe a western sycamore, but and again, not not water, all year round. So this isn't about irrigation. This is about collecting rainwater when it rains, and then it gets to dry out. Definitely don't mess with the grade when you are planting trees. It will cause the bark to rot. It's just that simple. So work with the existing grade. It may take a little bit to figure that out, but don't mound soil up, any additional soil up around a tree. And let's think about practicing integrated pest management when we do deal with our trees. We've been talking a lot about the microbial community. Look, healthy trees are actually a lot more resistant to pests and diseases and to drought. So there's, everything flows in an ecosystem. And so if trees are unhealthy before the drought, they're going to get worse. And if a drought happens, they're going to be susceptible to having, pests and so forth. So we really want to do everything that we can to not be thinking about how do we kill stuff off, but rather what do we need to add into this system in order to bring it back to health. And this is a different way of thinking about even integrated pest management. It's a different way of thinking about landscaping because a lot of our training is about what we need to remove, identifying pests to remove them. Instead, I'm suggesting that we switch to a policy of identifying things so that we can find predators, so that we can add in plants that can support the ecosystem. So diversity is really the number one tool that we have for combating pests and diseases. The higher the diversity in the ecosystem, the healthier the soil is, the stronger the microbial community is. The microbial community will actually edit the genes of the plants in the ecosystem to create a drought response, to create a response to other pressures. The healthy soil boosts the dissolved solids in the leaves of the plants, which make them unpalatable to pests. So when we apply things like fertilizers, and we disintermediate this relationship between the microbial community and the plant itself, we're actually setting the whole ecosystem on a course of catch-up, where it is now going to be susceptible to the pests, to the diseases, and to drought. It's not going to be able to respond in the same way. So let's think about, let's go even one step further than the typical integrated pest management to how do we create more diversity to just not even view things as pests anymore. And when we are managing trees, definitely hire a licensed professional. This is for trees and large shrubs. I mean, these are the investments that are being made in landscapes. You know, the money goes into these things. Why does this tree look like this? Well, it's not just a bad pruning job. This is actually, the tree has responded to the stress of the too severe pruning, and it's pushed out excessive photosynthetic tissue from every single node that it possibly can on the tree. So it's coming out, it's not just coming up from the ground, it's coming out, you know, um, all along the limbs and the trunk. And this is a tree that is in severe distress. You know, whenever you see a fuzzy tree, think about it and say a prayer for it, because even here, these pictures aren't all that great because they were taken at night, but I went to a shopping, you know, an entertainment center, essentially in an urban setting, and was really marveling at these beautiful, clearly preserved, right? When they built the center around it, they preserved these trees. And I thought, gosh, are these sequoia? What is this? What is this stuff? And the whole time I'm sitting against this hedge and I'm thinking, oh, it's weird that they planted this hedge right up against the tree. And then when I stood up, I realized, oh, no, that's not hedge. That's the tree. It's been hedged by maintenance. I guess they're trying to make it, you know, into a feature instead of a bug. But yeah, this is a stress response. This tree has obviously been pruned. It's good. This is all mostly basal growth. I don't know if it's coming out of the trunk or not, but all this basal growth coming from this tree, it is definitely way stressed. Oh, it's so sad. Uh, I mean, it's a good, I have to say, it's actually, it both delighted and horrified me. So avoid these pruning practices, obviously. No topping. When you top a tree, I mean, you basically, it's like cutting off, you know, it really is like cutting off a head. They call it coppicing for that reason. Uh, and certainly never take more than 25% of the canopy within a growing season. So it's just like managing almost all plants. You definitely don't want a lion's tail either. That's the technique that you see on the left, where there's just a limb, and then there's this spurt of growth that's left on the end. Basically, these are like little sails. So as soon as it becomes, you know, windy and the Santa Ana's hit or whatever, that limb is going to be, it's going to be weak because of all of the pruning, but it's also going to be weak because it's got this sail hanging out on the end of it. So both of these are terrible pruning practices. And never prune while in drought. You really resist it. When the reason is that the tree requires water when you prune. It has to repair itself in one way or another, and in order to do that, it's going to need to draw on water in the soil. So when you prune, you are actually stimulating the use of water. So certainly during a drought, you don't want to be doing any aesthetic pruning. You don't want to be um, cutting it back in any way. You don't want to be in any way inhibiting this plant from keeping itself cool, from keeping layers cooler. So when you cut off upper levels of the canopy, you actually expose lower levels to more sunlight. It can be, and that is going to require more water as well. So yeah, you really don't do it. Like in drought, especially, just skip a couple years. And definitely prune trees only with birds in mind. This means that be aware of nesting seasons. So, from the beginning of March through the end of August, there are lots of animals, lots of birds that are trying to build nests, that are raising families. This is not the time to be pruning trees. And there are some birds that are essentially nesting all year round. So you really want to be mindful of that. And you also want to understand that it is illegal to destroy nests. So you need to stop pruning. If you see a nest, it's not like, oh, here's a nice nest for a client. No, it's not to be done. In fire zones, and this is something that is in a lot of discussion these days, but lifting the skirts, in other words, trimming up the tree to 6 feet or 1/3 the total height of the tree to eliminate that dead wood is something that is recommended. And this is recommended by CAL FIRE. Or better than using chainsaws and so forth, use animals. So animals, this is goat brush clearance, and they love eating, right into the, right, browsing all of that low lying stuff on the trees. Not only will they clear out, an area that maybe is, at least to us, overgrown, and I'm going to talk about that too in a little bit. It's undergrown from animals' perspective, but it's overgrown from human perspective. But allowing animals to do this work is a lot better for the plants and for the overall environment. So think about that. Certainly, prevention is better than a cure, really. Protect trees during construction. So this means you're thinking about where the root zones of the trees are, and I would actually argue that this fencing, this is from the North Carolina Urban Forest Council, but I would argue that the fencing here is too close to the trees. This needs to actually be pulled away. These are really big trees. They've got a huge canopy. All of this protection should be out at the drip line. So it's a good, it's a good thought, but essentially what you're doing is you are protecting this tree from compaction, from physical injury of having, something accidentally scrape it. There's no dumping of chemicals or anything like that within this zone. And I will tell you from personal experience that many years ago, 20 years ago or so, I did a massive renovation on a property that had several large trees. One of those trees was very, very close to where pool equipment was going to be installed. And I was, I will admit it, I'm maybe a little too cavalier about this pool equipment installation being so close. It was definitely at least at the drip line, maybe even a little under the drip line of a pretty big tree. And, I was counting my blessings when we finished the project. It took about a year to finish the project, and things looked great. The tree was fine. 3 years later, that tree was completely dead. So did I cause that? Did some other thing cause that? Yeah. This is things you learn as a contractor. Avoid cutting the roots. If you're going to be cutting roots, definitely get a consulting arborist in to help you make decisions about where to cut roots. But just avoid it. It is definitely not going to bode well for the tree. And definitely avoid piling soil up against the roots. This takes planning. If you are doing a project, it takes planning to not have the tree in the middle of a giant soil pile. It just happens this way, especially on really small properties with many trees. But this is a surefire way to kill this tree. I pretty much guarantee this tree is going to be dead. Why? Well, not only is all the soil around it, but you can see the tire tracks from compaction and compacting under that canopy. Yeah, this tree is not going to survive this renovation. Weed whackers. One great reason to not be planting trees and grass that has to be cut weed whackers actually will kill, this will kill the tree. It may take a little while for it to happen, but this exposure of the inner parts of the tree to, and cutting away the bark like that is definitely going to kill it. And so the solution is grow something else. If you have to, if you have to be managing a landscape like this, have no mow zones around trees. I mean, or uh, yeah, I mean, hand trimming, oh, what a pain. But don't plant it in grass. How about that? Unless it's going to be some kind of natural lawn situation. Trees and grass actually need to have mulch out to the drip line or beyond. So this is the way to have a tree in grass. And it's essentially, unless of course this is grass that's never going to be mowed, or a grassland. And you'll notice in a grassland, there are, remember the tree shadows. There are plants that are growing usually under this part of the tree that are in symbiosis with the tree and are basically living off of the dropping of the organic matter from the tree. So, yeah, like let's mimic nature. Uh, mulch out to the edge of the tree. I mean, edge of the canopy. Okay, let's talk a little bit about watering. When we have trees and lawn, I mean, not only do we have the problem that we just saw with the whole mulching and so forth, but we have a problem figuring out what the hydrozoning is, because, what do we do with the sprinklers? First of all, how do we make sure that if we have spray, we are not uh, hitting the trunks of the trees? And almost impossible, frankly, especially in a small space like this. But what do you do? How do you manage this? Do you limit the sprinkling, the irrigation of the lawn for the tree? Do you turn the sprinklers off completely? You have to be really careful with that strategy, because this tree has adapted, despite its very poor staking job. This tree has adapted to being in grass that's irrigated. When you stop irrigating that grass, this tree is going to suffer, because it, expects water, shallow, frequent. And so this is definitely where the symbiotic relationship between the grass and the trees is not working in your favor. They need proper irrigation. So not only do we want to cut back the grass to the canopy, to the drip line of the tree, and cover that with mulch, but then we also want to use concentric rings of drip irrigation. And we can use something like this. This is it's sort of a temporary device. It's called a tree ring irrigation contraption. It can actually attach to a hose. And certainly if your landscape is in transition, this is a way to handle that. So you can start to essentially wean the tree off of lawn irrigation by expanding, the mulched area, and then using one of these contraptions to start this tree on its own irrigation schedule. Adding a new drip irrigation zone with a separate valve is definitely the way to go. All trees and large shrubs should be segregated from the rest of the landscape if possible, certainly from grass, but even from other shrubs and ground covers. And the rationale behind that is, first of all, you get more control when you're just irrigating trees. And you could even further subdivide based on establishment. If you have established trees, they might need, drip irrigation for the emergency dry winter. And then more newly established trees might need to have more irrigation. And so they would be on separate zones. But the reason that you're going to do this is so that you have control if we get into a situation where we are in a drought and we have to reduce landscape irrigation. It allows us to prioritize the trees and shrubs and keep them getting this, water, even when the less expensive and more easily replaced plants are allowed to not get water. So the way that we set up these drip irrigation circles is it's concentric circles of the drip irrigation. You want to start no closer really than, I mean, unless it's a very small tree, but if it's an established tree like this, you want to be at least 12 inches away from the trunk. I mean, you could even go 18, 24 inches away from it to start your first ring. You don't want to be against the trunk of the tree. And then the concentric rings uh, go out from there all the way to the canopy. And I would go even 2 or 3 feet beyond the canopy. As you would with your mulch, you also have the drip line. And your intention with putting these drip lines is to wet at least 50% of the soil surface where the drip line is. So under this canopy, you're going to be wetting at least 50% of the soil surface. And that's the objective with designing irrigation around the tree. But regardless of what you're planting around the tree, make sure that they are separated on a dedicated valve. You can also consider deep root irrigation. These are specific devices that are installed at the same time, usually installed at the same time that you install the tree. I'm going to show you in just a couple of slides, also installing aeration, uh, vertical, it's called vertical mulching, a vertical 4 inch or even 6 inch tube, perforated tube. And sometimes these subsurface, subterranean drip bubblers are even placed into tubes like that. But this particular type is actually designed to not be, not be inside of a perforated pipe. It has its own perforated pipe attached to it. But essentially, the idea here is that the subsurface bubbler is delivering water right at the roots of the plant, which is where the plant needs the water. It doesn't need it up in the canopy. It needs it down in the ground. It also has the advantage, potentially, of helping to minimize root shock, because the reason that plants have root shock, and especially when you're planting larger plants like 24-inch boxes and bigger, the reason there is any kind of shock that goes on is because any moisture that is actually in the container, in the root ball, can be very quickly pulled out of that root ball by the surrounding soil that's too dry. So having these subsurface bubblers allows you to provide that irrigation right there, especially right from planting. Now, I would say the caveat is that yes, the plant wants water at its roots, but it really wants water that is coming through that microbial system, that healthy living soil. So it wants the mycorrhizal fungi and everybody else to be gathering that water for it, even more so than just taking it up from its roots. And the chances in particularly heavy soils that you would have a waterlogged condition kind of go up when you are burying the irrigation. So it's really something to be thinking about, making sure it's the right choice for you. Tree diapers are certainly options, especially for planting new trees, but also for potentially getting through drought conditions. In hard to reach places, like this is a parkway, where there might not even be a direct irrigation line out there, tree diaper can work. Tree gators, same thing. These are basically devices that release water slowly around the tree. They're filled with a hose. And they can also be used for smaller trees when planting occurs. Frankly, I can't get my head around these because I want to see where the plant is in the ground. Like to me, these are always frustrating because because I can't see that connection. And yeah, that's how I tell whether or not the tree's doing well, is looking right there where the trunk meets the roots in the ground. And yeah, so. But how much do you water your tree? Well, that's a really good question. We're asked it all the time. I'm sure you are too. It depends, as all irrigation does, on soil type, the depth of the roots, the time of year, whether it's a deciduous tree or evergreen. What is the context in the garden? Is it in grass? Is it elsewhere? And how are you actually delivering the water? And once you've answered all those questions, you can at least start to answer the question of how much. And the good thing is there are some very tree specific calculators out there. One that I'm going to point to is at the Center for Landscape and Urban Horticulture, which I believe is UC Davis. And they have an individual tree and shrub water demand calculator. So it's specifically for trees. And the key here is the diameter of the canopy. So this is basically telling you, this is a proxy for root zone. Um, it's not perfect, but it's a good proxy for saying, okay, how much area is covered by the root zone of this plant. And then you're going to need to enter your evapotranspiration data. This can be gathered from looking at the California irrigation management and information system. I don't remember what CIMMYS stands for, but it is essentially the California um, uh, group of weather stations that are gathering data about evapotranspiration all across the state. It's a very sophisticated system, and you can go to that database in order to determine what the average evapotranspiration in inches per day is, and you plug that in. You can search the CIMMYS station by putting in your, location, and that will give you a number, and you plug that in, and then what pops out is inches per week. So as all irrigation, irrigation is never talked about in gallons, as we know. It's inches per week, and the result of this is that depending on the root depth and the available water holding capacity in the soil, you can essentially be irrigating trees and shrubs anywhere between, from 1 week to 2 week intervals in the height of summer. And then, of course, that is reduced as you go into the shorter days in the spring and in the fall, and then maybe even eliminated entirely in the winter if it's a wet winter. And that is specifically for Mediterranean and plants that are adapted to our climate. Now, some plants are very closely adapted to our climate. Local California native plants grown in community. It is totally possible that they may not need, excuse me, irrigation in the summertime. They need their irrigation in the winter time when they are accustomed to getting it from the rain. And if it isn't raining and it's not replenishing the soil, or you're not capturing rainwater, then they're going to need irrigation in the wintertime so they can make it through the summertime. So you definitely want to use your knowledge of the site, your knowledge of the ecosystem and context that those plants are in order to tweak the information that you get out of a watering thing. So now, how do we think about planting more trees? Well, it's all well and good to say plant more trees, but there are things for us to really think about. First of all, it needs to be in the right place. Right plant, right place, and especially for trees. Because it's they that are suffering when we don't plan ahead. Uh, you know, this tree, I mean, these pictures make me so sad, I have to say. Uh, this tree didn't ask to be planted under an electrical line. It's a giant tree. Why is this planted under this electrical line? Um, yeah, there's got to be something better. I mean, really? You didn't think that planting it right against the foundation of the building was going to be a problem? I mean, apparently you didn't because you've got this camellia there. And that's probably about the location of the ficus that they planted right against the building. Yeah. Maybe we want to reconsider the role of some trees in our environment because of fire. Um, some of those trees, and it's interesting because this discussion is evolving quite rapidly as a result of recent urban fires in Southern California. A lot of very, very good data coming out about just how unflammable these plants were, and that it was not some of these what we consider to be the typical culprits that were conveying fire at all. The fire ended up being predominantly a structure to structure fire instead of a landscape conveyed fire. Um, it is true from this picture anyway, you can see that these palm trees with all the flammable debris that's often on the inside of them, they can create quite a lot of embers, and embers are, especially in a windy situation, are the 90% of structure fires are a result of embers and firebrands. So, maybe palm trees are a consideration for thinking about where we plant them. Uh, but even pine trees, eucalyptus, juniper, cypress, it's really a very case by case situation. And what I'm saying here is consider it. I'm not saying, definitely remove. I'm saying think about it, think before you plant. There are a lot of other trees that are provide much, much better options. Coast live oaks, sycamores, desert willows, western redbuds, Pacific wax myrtle. These are all great plants, um, trees that would be great substitutes for that. There's a lot of discussion about this too, the fire ladders. CAL FIRE has for years been talking about fire ladders where if fire is coming in at ground level, we want to make sure that it can't jump into the canopies of trees, and presumably the thought is canopies of trees and then be transferred to structures. But one of the reasons that this is kind of coming into question, and again, I'm not saying yes or no, but it's kind of coming into question because a lot of this data is based on fires that are grass fires. That are coming from wildland as grass fires, and they're concerned about the fire going up into trees. The fires that we saw in these urban areas just in the last year weren't grass fires. And in fact, in many cases, the trees themselves were creating buffers. They were actually absorbing embers in their green leafy canopy, and even larger shrubs as well. They were absorbing those embers and actually keeping them, they were acting as fire breaks, keeping them from igniting structures beyond. So there's a lot of conversation going on around this. I'm coming down, on the side of some of these things are just, kind of good practice for managing plants. That said, I promised that I was going to come back to the topic of overgrown versus undergrown landscapes. This is a concept that I was just recently introduced to, and I think it makes a lot of sense that from the perspective of almost every other creature on the planet, our landscapes are way undergrown. It's only we humans that um, view landscapes in this way, this very domineering way, where we strive to keep all the plants separate from each other and so forth. So it could be that this whole fire ladder conversation is going to evolve over the next couple of years, and we'll keep keep you tuned in on that. And the same thing for um, the spacing of trees on slope. When you look at so the spacing that you see here is essentially saying that we want to have a minimum of 10 feet between the canopies of the trees. And when you are on a slope, this is going to expand to, 4 times the height of the plant, or 20 feet on a moderate slope and 30 feet apart on a greater than 40% slope. This is being called into question too. A lot of this conversation is coming from the fact that as fire moves up a hillside, the plant material in front of the fire actually gets massively dehydrated by the heat of the fire. And so as a result, it becomes more flammable. And the idea here is that by keeping the trees separated, we don't have canopies that are igniting as easily. But the reality is that if you look at slopes in nature and you look at, you go back to like oak savanna as an example, trees weren't always spaced like this, and the ecosystem was pretty darn healthy. So maybe in some of this spacing and pruning and all this stuff, we need to have a lot more realistic conversation about soil health, about plant health. That those two things are the ultimate protectors and fire resistant practices. That spacing maybe is not really what's going to make the difference. So more to come on that. We actually have a class on that coming up. You definitely want to be planting for energy conservation. So for sure, the south side of the property should be your priority with regard to planting trees and large shrubs. So you want to be making sure that you're protecting your structure and even protecting your roof from that southern heat. Western exposure also is an important, important exposure to protect from. And on the south side, it's probably best to have deciduous trees. And the reason for that is you're going to want to have that canopy in the summertime to cool things down, but in the wintertime, you're going to want to get as much sunlight in as possible, and that's going to be coming from the south side. So the deciduous tree allows that sunlight to warm your home in the wintertime. Now, if you have solar panels, things change. So in solar panels, you're going to need to be thinking about the spacing. Fewer trees, of course, and also spacing further away from the building. So it might be tight in a very small space, a small landscape. I just want to say this is a perfect plug for less density of structures in a single family residential. Instead of building to the lot lines, how about if we build smaller houses and have more trees around it? That's just an idea. But yes, with proper spacing, it can work. And again, it's a deciduous tree that you want to prioritize on the south side and also on the west side of the homes. In terms of designing, for kind of aesthetics and using trees in a landscape, especially in the context of like a tree bait, it's a good idea to try to anchor the landscape by shading the entrance. So when someone is walking into your home and coming to the front door, having that shade that, remember the fractals and the relaxation that people get from being in, under a canopy of a tree, that is what you want to try to convey, or that benefit by placing a tree that can shade your entrance. The other alternative is think about framing a view. Suppose you have a window on the front of your home. Instead of planting right in front of the window, frame it. Put trees on either side of the window. Maybe in this case, you're keeping one to shade the front entry and then one further out in the landscape. And the view through the trees under the canopies of those trees is a very, very aesthetically appealing view. So framing that view is better than just sticking it right in front. And if you want to have a focal point outside of a window, let's say, again, it's not right in front of the window, it's moved away. So move it closer to the street, push it out so it creates an enclosure within the landscape that can now be planted. It's a good place for a rain garden. This creates the feeling like you're in a woodland, and it's much more aesthetically appealing. And really plant trees because it's an environment that we all deserve. I mean, look at this. Don't you want this in your home? I think everybody would want to come home to this. And I think that there is I know, as professionals, we're talking about commercial landscapes a lot. And in fact, this is a commercial setting. Uh, but the um, takeaways for residential are there too. And I think that having large trees, having a really setting a mood with trees is it's just really an incomparable thing. And it works even in a relatively small landscape. It doesn't have to be a massive 10,000 foot landscape for you to plant trees. You can definitely do it in a 1,500 square foot space, as this indicates. And when you plant a tree, just remember, it's not just plopping the tree in the soil. It says dirt here, but I'm going to say soil. We want to make sure that we are watering at least 5 times. That means that when we dig the hole, we're watering. Before we plant the tree, we make sure that the root ball is very wet. It needs to be completely hydrated. We want to make sure that when we place that tree in the ground, that the hole is wet, maybe not just once, but twice. And then after we backfill and compact and cover with mulch, we want to water it again. And the reason that we're doing that is, first of all, we're making sure that the root ball, it has enough hydration that if there is dry soil around it, it isn't pulling all that water out right away, so we reduce shock. But the other reason is it's actually watering the surrounding soil. So it's reducing the probability that you're going to have that transfer of water out of the root ball. Definitely using post augers to decompact before planting is an option. If you plan where you're going to be planting a tree and then use post augers around that planting hole at some distance. And what is the distance? Well, it depends on how big the tree is, but you're basically thinking about, where's the drip line of the tree going to be, like just outside of that. You're doing these post auger holes to just give you an opportunity to put some compost in there. And then also do this thing that I talked about earlier, the vertical mulching. So what you have here is a perforated pipe that is going down into the landscape, and it's right adjacent to the root ball. So it's not within the root ball, but it's right at the edge of the root ball when it's planted. You put a cap on this, and actually, the great thing about this is you can pack that entire pipe with compost or worm castings. Compost is probably best. Just fill it up with that stuff and water it really, really, really well. Put the cap on it. And every quarter or so, you can come and put more compost in there, more water. And this is a way for you to actually be jump starting the biological activity around the plant, around the tree. Honestly, trees really benefit from this. It also is helping to create aeration in the soil when you're planting, which is especially important in compacted soils. And really start to think about how trees work in the contouring of your landscape. Whether you have established trees and you're contouring around them or you're planting anew, think about co-locating really trees with your rain gardens. Make sure that they're getting that water off of your roof so that, and the other hard surfaces on your landscape, and that they are planted near permeable hardscape, so that they get the water free from the sky, so it reduces your irrigation of them even in establishment. And just plant more trees because they slow spread and sink rainwater. Uh, when definitely take a look at the root ball when you are buying trees. The tree bait is 15-gallon minimum. Make sure that you have a healthy root ball when you take that thing out. And one of the reasons that this is an issue is that sometimes in nurseries, trees are actually planted with their um, uh, with their containers intact or without. They grow in a 1 gallon, or even in this case a quart size container, as they're started as a seedling, tissue culture or whatever, and they grow to the maximum of that, and then that plant is plopped into a 1 gallon, into a 5, into a 15, and the plant ends up having root constriction, like this. Yeah, that's something you want to be thinking about. When you remove a plant from the can, it should look like this. This is what the roots look like. Of course, now there's a whole discussion about whether all trees should be planted as bare root or not. Especially 15 gallons or smaller. When you start getting really big size 48s and 105s and stuff like that, of course they can't be. But in a size that you can handle, removing the soil, there is a lot of discussion in horticulture about planting plants like this bare root so that you can see the root structure, so that the roots can be fanned out in the soil when you are planting and they're given their best opportunity. Some other things to watch out for are looking at the canopy shape. You want to make sure that it's well on its way and it doesn't require pruning. Uh, you know, Buying trees from a nursery or accepting trees from a delivery is a little bit like you have to put aside all your ideas. You can fix this in the field. If it looks bad in the can at the nursery, don't get it, because it's not going to be able to be fixed in the field. You want to make sure there aren't lots of forks in the branching and no crossed branches. Certainly, you want to make sure that there are no signs of disease or injury. And also just, make note, is this a multi-trunk tree? Is it a standard? Could I take a couple of standards and plant them very close together at 5-gallon size or even 15 and get a multi-trunk that would look better than what I'm having to purchase? Is it deciduous or evergreen? These are things to be thinking about as you're purchasing your plants. And I'm going to tell you from experience, because this is a project that we designed and built. And, this is 15 years later, but it's worthwhile taking a look at it because there are a bunch of things going on here, and you may be able to see right away some of the things that were going on. So this tree right here in the middle of the picture, now let's not look at the Abutilon. Oh no, yeah, Palmarii. Um, let's not focus on that because that has a similar problem. But this tree was planted, and whether it was cross staked or not, I do not recall. But obviously, over time, this tree began to lean, and the result of the maintenance staff was to plop a stake here and then, try to reel it back in. You can see that the drip irrigation was never moved or altered in any way to, enhance the growth of this tree. And in fact, it doesn't have concentric rings around this tree. It just has one ring. So there really isn't any room for expansion with this unless you're cutting into the line and putting new in. The other thing is it's apparent from the way this root is girdling, which means it's wrapping around like this, that this was something that was going on in the can itself. So this should have been recognized when the tree was planted. Either we as landscape architects or contractors should have seen that this is what was going on in this plant material. And I would say that um, this is kind of a result really of value engineering. And this is when projects are value engineered. In other words, you're a lot of pressure on price. When that's happening at the beginning, you might not see the effects right away, but you will see them years later. And in this case, the delivery probably, waiting for another tree to be delivered probably would have held up installation, which was very limited time frame. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why it happened, but the result is that this tree is not healthy. It's been a disaster really for many years. I'm going to go back to this. You can see what it looks like here. It's really kind of sad situation when you have this tree, which was planted at the same time, looking great. Like, maybe a little small for almost, I guess at this time it was maybe 10 years. A little small maybe for a 10-year plant. And I don't know, we can talk about that. But yeah, looks a lot better than that other one, doesn't it? So it all comes down to thinking about things before they happen. When things are being planted has knock-on effect. And this is not a maintenance issue, right? The maintenance people tried what they could. This is not a maintenance issue. This is a design and installation issue. And really considering how big roots do get, I mean, I think this is just, it was a toss up whether this should go into the resilient category or an indication of how big roots are. Roots are incredibly, I mean, this is a stone pine, okay? And it's all stone pines up here. This is 100-foot tall, 100-foot wide canopy tree. Yeah, it needs some serious roots. And no, ficus just don't make a good hedge. There's just no ins and outs about it. This tree wants to be, it wants to be somewhere else. It does not want to be in a parkway for sure. It doesn't want to be in Southern California. It wants to be in your sewer system, as you can see here on the left, grabbing all those nutrients. And make sure that you're cross staking it properly. And after a year, you're removing those cross stakes. That's a beautiful job, actually, right there. It's easy to become enamored with the architectural details of a tree. I happen to love the Arbutus marina. I mean, what a gorgeous tree, right? This red bark, the leaves are so green, the beautiful dangly flowers, it's just gorgeous. Form and structure kind of take your breath away, color, all that stuff. And when you're talking about, selecting trees, it's really easy to do that. And make sure you step away, step back just a little bit and just see how big do trees get and what is the context. I mean, this tree is at least 15, maybe 20 feet tall. The arbutus is. And then, of course, behind it, you've got that sycamore tree, which is, 100 feet tall, maybe at least 80 feet tall. So think about what the scale is at maturity when you're planting trees. Don't be afraid of it, but definitely, think about it. And why not go for big trees? I mean, I just love these multi-trunk sycamores in the right context. I mean, this could easily be done by planting in a tight group, um, multiple 1-gallon trees or 5-gallon trees and just plant them all in the same hole. You'd get this effect. It's just, I mean, this to me is just incredible. And you can use trees to actually anchor the entire palette for the landscape. So here the Palo Verde is really setting the tone for the landscape and allowing you to have all this other architectural stuff going on. Here you have Cercis, and it's plunked down in the middle of a Japanese garden, which is fine. It's a mixing. It's a setting of a tone. Think about layering. I think this is a really important thing for us. We tend to think about hedges as being one, we have to select one plant for a hedge, when actually it's so much better to have a more complex hedge, take up a little bit more space, get that layering, trees, large shrubs, small shrubs, ground covers, creating a barrier, a visual barrier with a complex hedge is going to be far more interesting and also far better for all the fauna and so forth. And remember that trees are not solitary creatures. They prefer to live in a community. So it's not just about planting one. Think about planting multiples, lots of different trees. And think about that understory. So it's not just the tree, but it's what's going to live underneath it. The tree wants to be in community. Remember that. And so find plants that enjoy being in community. And here we have, the sycamore, and then underneath it, we've got ribes, and we've got aquilegia, and we've got some kind of carex. I'm not sure what it is. And we've got berberis and other wonderful things happening. Okay, if you really get into this, get into the Miyawaki forest planting. Lots of great research coming out of Miyawaki forest planting. And the research is all about this idea of landscapes being undergrown. It turns out that trees do far better when there are many, many, many of them in a relatively small space. They will actually create an incredibly dense system that that suppresses disease. The whole community ends up having greater immunity to pests and pathogens. So thinking about how to grow something, not just have one tree, but maybe, really layer it out. The whole system will actually grow a lot faster. And yeah, so Miyawaki forest, look it up. It's a really very interesting planting method, and there are places that you can go throughout the country to take a look at these Miyawaki forest plantings. And let's start to think in terms of planning about how we can integrate other plants into our urban forest. So we talk about an urban forest, and that's all great, but one tree alone in a box in concrete is not an urban forest making. An urban forest is made when that tree is in community with lots of other trees. It's got room for its roots, and it has a lot of space for other plants to be planted under it. And then, of course, we have to really think carefully about what to do post-fire, because when trees are damaged in fire, it is a instinct of humans to rush in and just cut it all down, like clear it out. When in fact, time needs to be taken. We need to observe what is really going on. There are a couple of great pieces of research coming out, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more happening in this space. Like really every month something new comes out. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety has been doing research on the LA County wildfires that happened earlier in the year. And also the University of California and USDA have started this post-fire restoration recovery manual. They're both really new publications, and like kind of hot off the press. And you should dig into those just to read a little bit more about what to do after fire. The most important thing is to observe. So you definitely want to be looking over a series of months. It's not just a couple of days, weeks, or whatever. You want to make sure that this tree is actually dead, because it requires a burning not just of canopy. A tree can survive canopy burning and leaf burning. It's really when there's excessive burning of the trunk itself. So if the trunk is completely burned all the way through into the growing parts of the tree, then and the canopy is gone, then it begins to become a difficult thing for it to rejuvenate. But you would be surprised. A lot of this research is going on, is taking a look at where there's this growth coming, just like you saw in the over pruned trees, the photosynthetic tissue coming out from the trunk and also from the branches of the tree. That's happening on trees that have been burned. You'll also get basal cell, no, basal growth from these trees. And so that's going to be managed over time. The tree is still alive. The tree is going to come back. It's not going to be in the same shape or form, but when it's been burned that badly, but it may come back. So you need to take time. You definitely do not want to prune the tree at all, really. Unless there's something in danger of falling on a house or on you or a car or something, maybe remove that piece, but definitely you don't want to be pruning the tree. Remember, any time you cut a tree, it is stressing it further. You don't want to fertilize, right? Fertilizer is the worst thing we can do anyway for any landscape, but we definitely don't want to fertilize these trees. And we want to make sure they're protected from compaction. So no vehicles driving around, etc. Definitely get an ISA certified arborist involved. And again, look, making sure that there's a little bit of water being applied. Now, soils may be hydrophobic. So really the very first thing that you want to be doing is getting compost down. So getting compost down around these trees, around really all these landscapes, is going to be key for reducing hydrophobic conditions. And as long as the soil is hydrophobic, it's going to shed water. So we definitely want to get that microbial activity going again, so water will start to go into the soil. Use your moisture probe to find out what's going on below ground. And definitely don't do anything until the tree is starting to recover and until a certified arborist has been able to look at it with you to determine whether or not it is going to rejuvenate. And that is our presentation. So we have lots of time for questions, I think. And I don't know if there are any questions. Are there questions?
It
I'm
always,
sure we
it
can
always,
get a discussion going.
it always takes a moment to turn everything back on. So as always, just such amazing information, inspiring, heartwarming, even in the face of all of the loss. So there were definitely some things that came up in terms of what is the new information that's coming out. We've been so trained as to how we deal with the fire. So that came up a few times. Questions are coming in now, of course. So
we're going to be discussing that, aren't we? We have a workshop, don't we?
On
Post fire.
yes, after the fires in June.
Yeah. So we're going to be digging into a lot of this research and hopefully being able to gather it all up and present it to you in June. So I'm gonna start kind of backwards. There's this issue about street trees not having enough space, to put down compost and so forth. It's true. Can you imagine that there's no space for compost in street trees? We really have to. I mean, as people who want to live in urban centers, I think we really have to be the voice of these, these giants. It's so important, to stop planting them the way they are. But certainly, a compost tea, an infusion of some kind is a great way to go. One of the great things about worm castings is they're absolutely water soluble, and so you don't really need to have much space with them. So, you could even, I think they could even end up on root structure and you water it all in and it, will make its way into the soil. But certainly a infusion, a compost infusion would be a great thing. I don't think it's really necessary to inject things into the soil. There are some arborists who make a healthy living, doing deep fertilization, they call it. This is absolutely not necessary. You know, the trees, the microbial community is very strong and you can build it from the top down. So that's really, and it happens fast. So, but it will not just happen. Okay, so this is the thing. The microbial community is not built by decomposition alone, remember? So just adding compost and mulch is not enough. Plants need other plants. So they need to have diversity in the system in order to have those roots exuding all those carbohydrates into the soil to build that microbial community. So it's decomposition, compost, mulch, worm castings, compost tea, all that's good. And then you need living roots as well. We are going to have links to the manuals that I showed. And one of them is in draft form still, but I understand it's going to be out by the middle of summer. And let's see.
And then I had some others from
Oh
previous
yeah,
ones.
why don't you go ahead?
Okay, no, it's all good. It's all good. So some of the questions were, you know, how do we deal with the impossible situations? So one of the questions was, you showed an incredible image of a pine tree that's just been, you know, topped with power lines. So what are some of the solutions when it has not been planned properly? How do we? Yeah. And it's hard because we feel like we're supposed to have an answer, but it hasn't been thought out. I mean, it just hasn't been thought out. So, you know, smaller trees.
Well, I think, you know, so number one is advocacy, and then education. I mean, use advocacy as an opportunity to educate planners, elected officials, etc., about the importance of this. In almost every urban center, there is usually a tree committee of some kind. I know in LA County there is, LA City, um, where I live, but I'm pretty sure that such a thing exists in other places as well. Um, but definitely advocacy is a big deal. And then, um, you know, trying to talk. I mean, this is very difficult. Trying to talk to the people who are doing pruning, you know, get out there and, you know, have a conversation. I mean, the thing is that street tree services are usually deprioritized in budget cuts. Um, and so in many cases, you know, there just isn't enough crew. There aren't enough trucks and crews and so forth. And they are coming around like every 5 years or something in a large city. And so, and their priority is to make sure that there's no arcing, you know, between the trees and the power lines. I mean, that's it. They're protecting that infrastructure at the expense of the green infrastructure. But you have to understand, you know, that is their job, and so they often are cutting so severely because in their minds and their planning, they're not going to be back for 5 years, and so they want to make sure that the thing is, you know, sufficiently demoralized. um, so yeah, trying to talk to them, possibility of offering, you know, if it's trees near you, like offering to have your own arborists or contractors prune the trees, and have them inspected, you know, to see that they are correctly pruned. Because there are ways to prune around power lines that don't involve, you know, cutting the tree, coppicing the tree or cutting it, right? And then, you know, in the worst case scenario, removing that tree and then advocating for hopefully recycling it into your landscape in one way or another. Um, and then advocating for that allocation of space to be bigger so that it's not just a little, you know, 3 by 3 area where the next one gets planted, but it's actually bigger than that, and that a tree does get planted. I don't know. I mean, there's no good answer except advocacy and education. That's it, really, in our society. I wish I could wave a magic wand on that one.
And then I think, the underlying or overlying that a lot of people don't recognize trees as living things. They're just objects.
Yeah, well, I think that really goes back to what we talked about. Maybe we didn't talk about it in this series, but in a lot of what we talk about in other professional training is the um, the negative feedback loop of people not having exposure to trees and more exposure to screen time has actually created a pervasive plant deficit. Yeah, it's called, I mean, colloquially, it's called plant blindness. I think officially it's like plant awareness syndrome or something, deficit or something like that. But basically plant blindness, where people can look at a situation, like they could look at this picture, for example, of me talking, they would see me and they don't see the trees. They don't recognize those as trees. They don't see, have any connection to that thing behind me. Plant blindness. It's a really frightening thing, and it's actually quite a pervasive, technologically driven experience. And as I said, it's a negative feedback loop. So the less they see the trees, the less they want to engage, the less they protect them, and so forth. Yeah, we just need to plant a lot more trees, and we need to get more people out into their landscapes. Yeah.
All right, so a couple more, and they keep coming in.
Good.
So one question was, when you were talking about, you were starting to talk about the hugelkultur, and when you have trees that you cut down, how you could potentially reuse them. This conversation came up about fire again. So if you pile the tree stumps, leaving gaps in air spaces for habitat, does that create a fire hazard in those fire-prone areas?
So, there are two things here. First of all, there's above ground and below ground. So below ground, there are no gaps, or there's as little gap as possible. It is absolutely packed with soil. And that is the key really to hugelkultur, is that when you're burying the wood, it is encased in soil. There's no air gap and all that sort of stuff, because that causes all kinds of issues with the decomposition and so forth. So below ground, no. Above ground, it's really interesting. So this is colloquially, we've done work with people who specialize in hugelkultur, and one of them lived in the right in the Eaton fire. It was in Los Angeles just this year, and their house burned, and nothing in their hugelkultur burned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the report from the field is that their landscape is, essentially unscathed. Some things, leaves and so forth, were desiccated because it's very, very, very hot, right? And so that all went, and there was a little bit of burning in leaves, but the hugels didn't burn. And I think that one of the things that's coming out of a lot of this research, and again, looking forward to reading through it more and presenting it in June. But one of the things that I'm seeing coming out of it is a recognition that we humans have this preconceived notion about how things work in the environment. And so we tend to focus on things that are seen to us, that are obvious. In ecosystems, the most important factors are totally invisible to us. That microbial activity that's happening in soil, the moisture that is held in soil as a result of that microbial activity, the health of the plants that is built as a result of that microbial activity. It's unseen to us, and it's also kind of untested to us until we have a fire, until we have a drought, until we have a heat wave, a cold snap, or a flood. And then we actually see, that, oh my gosh, plants that are in these ecosystems, these really well developed soil ecosystems thrived through those events. And I know that we're going to see that in the fire, in the results of fires. So yeah.
I forgot, we have to launch the poll,
Oh,
the
what's that?
survey. So I'm going to do that in the chat immediately. Do you have the slide? Because I can put the link in there. I was so enraptured by what you were saying.
Go ahead.
I completely spaced, but I'm going to do that in just 1 second.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
All right, it should be there. So yes, so for those of you that are still here, if you would take a little bit of time and just fill that out while we continue to answer questions. This is so fascinating. So the next one, again, where we hear sort of what's the old story and now we're like, what's a new way of looking at things? The question about the Miyawaki forest. And looks super cool, but does it fly in the face of not laddering plants for fire?
Well, that's really what I was getting at, right? With the plant laddering thing. Like this is all emerging research. Yeah, it's emerging research. I think it really goes to this idea that we have, I'm going to say something kind of controversial, but not too controversial. But we have this idea that we are creating some kind of a natural ecosystem. When we do our turf removal and so forth, we plant native plants, and it's all great. It's maintained, really nicely, and we learn how to prune everything once a year, and all this stuff. And actually, yeah, none of that is appreciated by the birds and insects and mammals and amphibians and everything else that want to be in the landscape. They want it as untouched as possible. They want to have places to hide. They want all kinds of little bits of things to make their nests with, whether they're a squirrel or a bird or some kind of ground dwelling, creature. So they want it, they want it. Like, I don't want to use the word messy because it's such a negative connotation. It's not messy. It's untamed, and it's allowed to express itself as the ecosystem that we are trying to create. And the idea that we are bending over backwards to try to make it all feel acceptable to people is really a very egotistical, really. I think, I say it for myself, it feels egotistical for me to look at a landscape and impose my human point of view on it and not be thinking about, well, I actually love birds. I haven't been able to get work done because there's a bird outside my window, as my team will attest. There's a bird that has built a nest right outside my window. I can't get work done. I can't be on Zoom with the window open because it's so distracting to me. I want to watch them all day long. Imagine what it would be like if your landscape is filled with birds and is filled with that life that is, essential to our futures as humans. It's essential to our mental development, to our brain development at every age, not just as children, but even as seniors. It's essential to us to have that interaction. And what do? We create landscapes that are devoid of that interaction, or are doing it, but only on our terms. So yeah, Miyawaki forest, go for it. Multiple layers. Hedges should be dense. Lots of different layers. Protection for the animals, protection for the birds. Lots of insects that are coming in. And worrying about fire. Well, yes, we are worried about fire, but as we said, in urban settings especially, it's about structures being built all the way to the property line. much more than it is about having a Miyawaki forest. And so that is a conversation that, we don't want to have. We want to keep saying it's the plant's fault. You need to pull them away from the house and all this stuff. Well, actually, we need to pull houses away from houses and give plants a little more space to do their thing.
Yeah.
So in healthy soil.
Yeah. All right, so there are a few more
My
questions.
take on it. Tell me what you think is different. Come on in.
Yeah.
It should be kind of a discussion.
I guess the one about the hugel, so I'm not as familiar with hugel cultures. The question was, could we plant trees in them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, small, right? Because it's nurse logs. So you're planting as small as possible. 1 gallon is best. Oak, whips and acorns are the best way to plant in hugel culture. Absolutely. But don't forget, as with everything, a hugel needs to be colonized. Oh, again, how terrible word, but it needs to be planted with as dense a diversity as possible. And you also need to allow things that come onto the hugel to try to heal it. Naturally, you need to let them do their thing, because they are playing a really important role. Like, Phacelia is an example of something that will just show up on hugels. And it is there for a very particular reason, to start to fix nitrogen and do a lot of healing of, the situation. And the wood that's in the hugels is nurse wood, essentially, for the new plants. So, start them out as small as you can.
All right, so then the last question that we will wrap up the morning with was, we had a dialogue about proper tree placement, the deciduous trees, so that we could really maximize sun and light and the time of the year. And there was this one tool that suggested that a tree be put on the north side, and the reason was for other considerations such as wind. And so is that something that would be?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, this wasn't saying don't plant trees on the north or east side of your home. And everything is contextual, right? It's all about your particular situation. This was really talking more about energy conservation from a point of view of warming the house and cooling it in the spring and summer. So focusing more on the south and west sides. But yeah, absolutely. Plant trees in the north side, plant trees in the east. I mean, yeah, I don't, okay, this is just a little thing, but anytime I plant cerces, I think of the east. It's because Eastern redbud, right? Eastern Cercis canadiensis, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think of that is in my head. I grew up in the East. I always saw I would roam the forests in the East, in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and so forth, and see the cerces growing under the canopy of these, magnificent trees. I mean, just gorgeous, huge trees. Cercis was always growing in the shade under those trees, and it was amazing in the springtime. They do their bloom, and it was just this phenomenal thing. So every time I plant a tree, a cercis, I think Eastern redbud, even if it's a Western one. And I always think about planting it on the east side of the house. Don't ask me why, it's just a thing. But yeah, plant your trees wherever.
And I think what you said was so important as far as context. So sometimes we come in and we're a little bit, with our blinders on in terms of a very specific question or a very specific situation. And the answer is almost always, you got to step back and look at the greater influences, the greater parameters that you need to take into consideration. So,
and there was a clarification that the person who asked the question was talking about particular tools for energy efficiency and planting and stuff. And I take advantage of all those tools. Yeah, that great idea.
Yeah. All right. Well, certainly from my part, here at G3, we are so grateful that you join us, and that we all become advocates for a better way of landscaping. And Pamela, if you'd like to say your goodbyes, we'll call it a day.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. The most fun of these talks is having the opportunity to dig into all the research that's going on, do my best that I can to bring you that, to synthesize it and bring it to you in a way that is understandable. And the dialogue that happens in the Q&A is really, I think, the most important thing. So thank you so much for bringing everything to this as well. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.